Well, you live in a beautiful part of the country and you're surrounded by great people, but there's a lot of suffering in your life. Well, the first thing I'm going to ask is, how do you handle that?
Well, a long time ago, I was talking to a Somali doctor, and I was in a meeting. Here was government people mainly, and Aboriginal organisation people, and I was talking about how many avoidable deaths were going on, how much violence, how much family dysfunction, and I got back to the deaths. And I said the rate of that people die, especially prematurely, is having a devastating effect on my wife's people. He said, well, Dave, I'm from Somalia and you don't understand. My people are used to it. We actually argued that it may seem to us Westerners that people are being emotionally devastated by all this suffering and death, but actually they just learn to cope. And so it doesn't have the same level, well, the same amount of psychological damage, I suppose, and emotional damage on them as it would on us pampered white Westerners. I was, at the time, a bit outraged by what he said, because to me it sounded like he was dehumanising his own people and my wife's people, but no, I agree with him. And the reason I agree is because we've just had to cope, and you can react two ways. You can let it destroy you, or you can make yourself, I wouldn't say harder, but you just learn how to defend yourself from it. And this applies particularly to my wife, more so than me. But after a while, you just start to pick and choose which funerals you're going to go to. To what degree you're going to allow all this premature death in particular to hurt you. You put up a wall. That may sound a bit callous, but when you're in the situation, you understand that is the only way you're going to survive. So you do. And I guess that's how people survived the concentration camps, the war. You know, what happened in Europe from 39 to 45 was unimaginable to us now, and people survived it. And I've always had huge interest in how they managed to do that. So I do a lot of reading around how people survive. And I guess the challenge is to defend yourself, but also retain enough compassion to keep trying to do something about it. One of the first bits of advice I give to young people who come here, you know, when I came here at the age of 25, all bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, sure I had the answers, etc. When I meet people like that now who come up from down south, equally naive as I was, the first piece of advice I give them is protect your own heart. Keep yourself, look after yourself first. And although I'm not a Christian, I'm fond of quoting the Bible. Jesus said, love thy neighbour as thyself. That implies you know how to love yourself the proper way. And you're no good to anybody unless you can do that. So I say to them, look after your own heart, number one, and then you'll keep the strength to actually help other people. If you don't do that, you're no good to anybody.
That's so true.
That's our philosophy.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I saw that up in the Cape a lot. And look, it happened to me too. Like I went through the same journey. I'm not gonna pretend anything different, even though I'd been lucky enough to have the experience of living in Papua New Guinea when I was a kid. So I had a degree of understanding and insight as to what was happening, and a knowledge that the dynamics were different, but I just wasn't exposed to that amount of tragedy and pain. Like it just, you know, it just, and you see it manifest. Like you said, you get these magnificent young people, you know, going up, and I've seen so many just completely psychologically wrecked people coming out of the Cape, just wrecked. You know, they'll never be the same. Like I'm sure some of them are still in therapy, you know.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I say to people. If you don't, you'll burn out. What's the use of that? It certainly doesn't help you, and it doesn't help anybody else. Yeah,
that's it. No, you're no good to anyone. But so look, tell me about the circumstances. Well, tell us where you are now for the listeners, and tell us what the situation is for you in your town, how things are.
Well, it's complicated. A lot of the news that's coming out of Central Australia, you know, it's not much coming out now because that's the way it works. You get a sudden interest by the media and then it drops away just as suddenly. But it's all pretty true. We're used to seeing an awful lot of violence, the consequences of it. There's the amount of criminality is staggering. But it's, as what I say is, yeah, that's Alice Springs, but it's everywhere north of Port Augusta, probably. It's not unique to Alice Springs. We know Tennant Creek, Mount Isa, Broome, Derby, you name it. They're all, and right through Western Australia, the more remote parts of Western Australia, South Australia, Queensland, Western New South Wales, the same sorts of things are happening. But what people don't understand, I guess, is that I ride a bike and sidecar, and I'm an old fella now, so I ran out of fuel on a main road. So looking pretty silly, I got off and I was pushing my outfit up onto the median strip. And a couple of, there were 3 or 4 of them, I can't remember, 3, I think, young Aboriginal girls, well, young women really, I suppose, mid-teens, something like that. They approached me. They were fairly typical young'uns from the town camp. They were teenage girls, so they're scrubbed up pretty nicely. They're clean. Their hair's tied back tightly the way they always wear it. They present themselves to the world. They're really keen to present themselves as pretty good looking and attractive, and that's what they do. And one of them said to me, "Can we help you, old man?" Now, of course, as you'd know, term old man is a term of respect.
Yeah.
In this part of the world. They were incredibly polite. They were concerned for me. They were compassionate. They were willing to help. And they were obviously language speakers. You can tell just in conversation that these kids speak an Aboriginal language as a first language. English wasn't their first language, but their English was pretty good. Now, those girls, quite possibly that very same night, were running the streets and smashing windows and breaking into shops. I mean, these kids are not, how can I put it? They are criminal to the extent that they commit crime, yeah, but they're not criminal by nature they retain their humanity. You could put it that way. You know, a kid comes along. I was at a club the other day and it wasn't a club, it was a shopping centre, and there were all these bicycles, push bikes chained up to the rack. And these kids were going along testing to see which ones, if one wasn't locked, they're grabbing hold of them. And I thought, oh, yeah, I know what you're doing. And I said, you bloke's going to knock off a push bike. Oh, no. And then ran away. But they were just normal kids. You can't look at them and think, this kid's going to knock your bike off, or this kid's going to...
No.
And we've seen that in my own family. My brothers-in-law, many, many years ago, my brothers-in-law turned up on a pretty flash mountain bike. And I said, that's been knocked off, hasn't it? And one of them said, oh, we didn't steal it. That mob down at one of the town camps gave it to us. Yeah. Oh, they also put it up close to the back fence, by the way, which was pretty obvious. And I said, oh, so another mob stole it. Oh, we don't know. They just gave it to us. Yeah, but when the police stop you, they're not going to believe you when you say we didn't steal it. And but those blokes, no, my brothers-in-law, they're not inherently bad or nasty or anything. They accepted stolen goods, that's all. And anyway, the funny thing was, I took it to the police station. I said I found it while I was out bushwalking. They kept it for a while. And then I got a phone call from a lawyer from Central Land Council, says, well, thanks, Dave. Just rang me up and said they had my bike. And I was just about to get a brand new one from the insurance company. So it turned out...
They flogged the lawyer's bike.
So it's a complicated world, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing's black and white. So, yeah, there's the people who absolutely infuriate me are the violent ones. I'd never met a murderer or a rapist in my whole life. Now I know dozens of them. All of them are black and all of their victims are black. That absolutely infuriates me. But at the same time, the young man who'll get drunk and kill his wife, when you meet him when he's not drunk, he's friendly, He's calm. And in fact, he's probably shy. It's not, people just don't get it, that we who live in these towns understand these things. And so the great majority of the white fellas want the crime to stop. They don't want their houses get knocked off, but they also have compassion for the kids who are doing it. People down in the cities don't understand that.
I think it's funny you should say that, because I try to explain that to all the new coppers that came up the Cape. And the last station that I was in, as you know, was Cohen. And I got to say, it was like I was blessed by God. I had this magnificent, senior connies. And when they went to leave, I had magnificent relievers come through too. They were all just fantastic. But some of them, especially the more junior ones, kind of didn't understand that, like, you can't be judgy. You kind of can't. And it's like, when I told one of them, I said, "Oh, that guy that we had a really good pizza oven out the back. So we'd every now and then we just invite people around for pizza nights." I said, "Oh, the guy was pizza night. Oh yeah, he's done time for murder. He's a murderer." This young cop's been like, that's right. So no, he's a good bloke. Like, I don't approve of what he's done. I can make that distinction. I said, and you just can't be picky. Like, some of the best community coppers we had in Arica were murderers. Like, these guys that had kind of truly repented, and they also had a bit of bravado, because they had a little bit of street cred about them, because they were, because they'd kind of committed this act, and they'd done their time in jail. So it's, as it's the new form of initiation. But I think it's the way the Western mind views criminality, and I'm uncomfortable with this, even after 30 years in the police, where it's like, oh, well, that defines you as a bad person. It's like, no, it doesn't. Yeah. I mean, we've all done stupid things. I mean, there, but for the grace of Almighty God goes I. And there's just some things I don't want to talk about that I just haven't been caught. Like, I think it's this simple, Dave. Like, people stick categories. It's like, if you do this, it categorizes you as this. They don't understand that the line between good and evil, as we know from the good book, and goes from it goes down between that line goes down between your heart, not between you and your neighbour. It's not between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. It's not even between criminals and victims. It goes down between. It's that simple. That's such a.
But at the same time, we've got to do something about stopping the behaviour.
Exactly, but it's about the behaviour. It's condemn not. As you well know, it's condemn not, yet lest you be condemned. It's more often translated as judge not, but arguably the more accurate condemn not.
I once said to one of my grandsons, who was then in his early teens, "Stop acting like an idiot." And he said, "I'm not an idiot." And I said, "Oh, no, you're not. That's why I wonder why you act like one."
Yeah.
Don't act like that. And I've got big sons, right? So they're my wife's late older sister's sons, and they call me father because I'm married to their mother's sister. And they're in their 50s. They're grandfathers. They're fully initiated, but they get drunk all the time. And one of them lost his son. His 21-year-old son died suddenly from a heart attack. He was fit. He was a footballer. Suddenly, he just drops down from a heart attack. So this bloke naturally is totally devastated. We've lost a son. We understand. But he's decided, literally, to drink himself to death. And all of my brothers-in-law did that. They all drank themselves to death. And they were good men. They didn't beat their wives. They didn't act violently and abuse their kids. They loved their kids. They may not have known really how to look after them, but they wanted to. I just think I've got some guests at my front door.
Oh, no worries. Well, mate, do you want to call this off and we can do it later?
No, it's all right. Look, can you blokes come back later? I'm just talking to somebody on the computer. Just come back a little bit later, okay? Good on you.
No worries.
Couple of kids from my wife's school.
Excellent.
Just dropping in to say hello to my pet snake. But
no worries. So look, I'd like to get your take on a number of issues. But when I was in Cape York,
before you do, can I just finish off that last bit?
Absolutely.
So this bloke in his 50s, he's lost his son, he's literally drinking himself to death. Now, Bess and I were originally, we knew what he was going through, so we didn't give him a hard time, but it's kept going. He's literally trying to kill himself. Yeah. And he's got a grandson. He's got daughters. So we just absolutely refuse to tolerate now his drunkenness. We put up with it before, we're not now. So he was at the club the other day. He was drunk already. He'd been there most of the day. I said to the bar staff, if you serve this bloke, you're breaking the law. He's my son. I don't want him to die. If you serve him, I will report you. I went to the management and I said, oh, no, security bloke, really. This tall South Sudanese security bloke. And I said, who's also has an Aboriginal child by a Warrabee woman. He knows local people. And I said, this bloke, he's my son. I've got the right to tell him, throw him out if he wants to keep drinking. Bess yelled at him in Warrabee. I yelled at him in English. He won $50 on the pokies. My wife said, good, now you can go home. And she called him a taxi. Go home. No more drinking. He at first arced up and tried to have a go back. And then he looked at me and said, I love you, Pop. People are crying out to be told how to save themselves.
Yeah.
And we go on with this absolute bloody nonsense about respecting elders and about how wonderful culture, how everybody's living in bloody dreamtime, la la land, and they can't do anything wrong. Too many are destroying themselves and they're desperately calling for help and nobody is helping them. And you can yell at them and swear at them, but as long as they call you dad, they thank you and say, I love you. But so that's how we cope.
You're right. It comes down to a concept you talked about before, dehumanization. Now, when you demonize someone, you dehumanize them. But when you angelize them and make them like these, perfect, noble savages, you're doing the same thing.
That's right. It's right.
Still dehumanization.
Well, there was a time when they couldn't do anything right and we couldn't do anything wrong. Now it's the other way around. That doesn't work either.
No. And again, because fundamentally it's the other side of the coin. What needs to happen, obviously, is we just need to recognize our own humanity, like our shared humanity. I don't know why. I don't want to rant. This is your interview, not mine. I don't know why that is so hard. But I'd like to get your take on sorcery. It was a big problem when I was in the Cape. And I just want to know what's happening there with it and creeping back and what is it like? Because some people, strangely enough, especially you get these really vehemently anti-Christian pagan people who are like, yeah, it's great. We're pushing over the patriarchy and take that, Yahweh God. Like they were celebrating it. And you're getting these people like actively encouraging it, even government officials.
Yeah. Well, Jesus also said the poor will always be with us. He could have said the lunatic bullfeds will always be with us as well, but he was too nice a bloke. There's always be that sort of stupidity. And once again, the idiocy of this world's longest lasting culture, we have to preserve it, it's wonderful. Nobody actually tells you, number one, what the word culture means, and number two, what parts of the culture are actually working well and what are actually killing people. And the belief in sorcery is killing people, from my point of view. So with my wife's mob, and I think this was generally true as far as I know for Aboriginal Australia as a whole, any premature death or life-threatening illness is caused by sorcery or a supernatural force of some sort, but usually by sorcery. And you have to find out who did it and you have to pay them back. This causes vast amounts of conflict, huge conflict. And most of, not long ago in the community my wife was born in, there was this huge feud that went on for years. The media came up with the idea that it was caused by the death of a murder of a young man in town. The murder occurred because of an accusation of sorcery. So actually it was the accusation of sorcery that kicked it off. And the accusation of sorcery is usually made by people close to the deceased who will cop blame if they can't shift it onto somebody else. So that's what happened. People who are most likely to be blamed tried to shift onto somebody else by accusing them of sorcery. So a young man died. He died of terminal cancer. He refused treatment. He was going to die, obvious. But that's not good enough. So another young man who lent him a football jersey was accused of causing the death because the jersey was obviously
the jersey, of course.
Jersey. And then so some young fellas from the deceased family are on the suds in town and spot not the bloke accused of causing the death, but two of his brothers. So they attacked them, stabbed them both, one dies. Bang, it's on for young and old, and it went on for about 8 years. So this is number one. That's what causes, how sorcery causes death, and just continuous violent conflict and feuding. I mean, Wadia, I don't know much about Wadia, but I'll bet you there's an awful lot of accusations of sorcery flying backwards and forwards up there. The other way it causes death, premature death, is by people believing so much in traditional medicine, spiritual forms of healing, that they refuse Western treatment. They say, oh, we don't want to go to Whitefella Hospital. Well, actually, our Whitefella Hospital, the vast majority of staff there aren't Whitefellas.
Yeah.
It's world science. It's world medicine. It's not Whitefella, any bloody thing. But anyway, one of our granddaughters, her kidneys collapsed. Now, kidneys are collapsing all over the place. Bess's kidneys collapsed 35 years ago. We know all about it. She's had several very close relatives die from renal failure. So her granddaughter goes down with it. Her main concern is that her belly is distended, which happens because fluids are retained. And her main concern is people think she's pregnant when she's not. So I say to her, that's the least of your worries. If you don't go on dialysis, you'll die. She doesn't want to go on dialysis. I say, well, it is your choice, but you will die if you don't. So she goes to a traditional healer instead. She says to us, with a big smile on her face, she feels much better now because he took a big invisible black snake out of her belly. Big black snake. And I said, did you see it? No, only he could see it. I said, that does not surprise me. And you paid him. Yeah, it's $300. So this charlatan cops a fee of $300. As far as I'm concerned, he wasn't a genuine traditional healer, because a genuine traditional healer would say, I can't fix that, which is what the old fellas in my wife's mob have always said. All the diseases that came with the white fellas, we can't fix those. So they admitted, we can't do it. So this bloke said, yeah, I can do it, and I'll charge you $300. I said to her, you can pull as many invisible reptiles out of your belly as you like, and it's your money, you can do what you like with it, but you will still die if you don't go on dialysis. We eventually convinced her, and she went on dialysis, and she's still alive and doing quite well. So that's another way that people die. And we know people who have said, nah, I don't want whitefella medicine for cancer. Some of them say, I'm going to pray to the Christian God in a very funny sort of way and trust in traditional healers, and then they die. So, and then their family blames somebody else for causing their death through sorcery.
Yeah.
So it just goes on and round and round. So you can't force people to change. My wife still believes an awful lot of things that I don't believe, and we agree to disagree. So she believes her kidneys collapsed as a result of sorcery. I said, I don't believe that. And she says, that's all right, you're a white fella. You don't have to. I said, good, because I don't. But I'm not going to try to talk you into believing what I believe. Just, you're doing all right, you're coping, okay. So you can't force people to change, but you can try to respectfully convince them and to adapt their beliefs in such a way that they keep themselves alive longer. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's my approach.
Absolutely. But you're so right about the thing too, because like I was having run-ins with a family in Cohen, and I won't say who they were, but to their complete credit, they came into the police station one day, a number, or women only. They didn't bring a man, which I thought was a bit unusual, but still.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the ladies came in and said, Matt, we've really got to talk to you. It's very important. We need to talk to you now. So of course, ladies, broke away. Outside we went. We sat next to them. I don't like sitting in the police station. So no worries. And I'm, having a chat. And they said, look, Matt, you've been cracking down on us for this stuff that appears to be violent in your eyes. And said, well, yes, it was, and I'm going to continue to arrest anyone that engages in this. So look, what you got to understand, Matt, is like we appear to be, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is how the conversation went. We may appear to be the instigators, but we're not. Yeah. We're actually the victims here. Those people have been cursing us. They're cursing us for a long time. It's causing deaths in our family. This young man died as a result. This young man died as a result. Same sort of thing. These young guys dropping dead from heart attacks at 25 and same.
Yeah.
You got to understand there is only one way to deal with this, and that's that. Now, the reason we're having this conversation with you is twofold. One, we know that you've been in Cape York for a while, and we're hoping you'll understand. So, we kind of want you to turn a bit of a blind eye to this, or at least, go easy and kind of like maybe, get it. And see, I mean, what do you do with that? Because I don't think, for complete clarity, I don't think those curses caused those people to die. But like, were they cursed? Yes. That was happening. Like, were these people cursing those people? Absolutely. Look, I went out and I found out, later on after I had that conversation, I went and spoke to some people and go, you guys are cursing the name of the family. And they're like, oh, yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what we do.
So again, it's not, I mean, when I say it's not in their heads, you know what I mean. Like, it's like, were they being cursed? Yeah. Yes. That's so you can't. How do you rationally argue that? Like, you might as well go to.
I don't know if you can rationally argue it because none of these beliefs are rational. They're not based on people don't rationalize about these things. They just don't. So it's pretty hard to. I think most people, like what my wife does, she has a bit each way, 5 bob each way. So she still believes very much in the power of sorcery and in the power of traditional healing, but she doesn't hesitate to go to the doctor when things are crook, because that's what, she would have been dead 35 years ago if she hadn't gone straight to the hospital when she did. She would have been dead within 20 hours. But she came back to Alice Springs from Bachelor, where she was studying, to go to a traditional healer because she'd been misdiagnosed by several doctors and paramedics. They'd misdiagnosed her. She'd gone there, including the local Aboriginal medical service, by the way. This was the beginning of the renal failure epidemic. She was right at the beginning of it. So even the Aboriginal medical service misdiagnosed her. So she said, well, I've tried all them, it's not working. And she said over the phone, do you mind if I come down for a traditional healer? I said, no, go for it. I'm back, whatever you want to do, because we didn't know what was going on. But if she hadn't gone, if I hadn't taken her to the hospital when I did, she would have been dead within 20 hours. Now, she still believes that was caused by sorcery, but it's very obvious to her that it was modern medicine that saved her life. So she has a bit each way, which I don't have a problem with. I don't have a problem with that. And I don't have a problem with the spirituality behind it all. I do have a huge problem with people believing that these sorcerers, these nasty people, have the ability to kill you. I just don't accept that at all. And how I counter it, I say to people, you are just as strong as them. Why do you believe they can hurt you? Especially to the ones who call themselves Christians, like my wife's aunt. She's always banging on about Christianity, how Christian she is. Yet she comes to my house and she calls me outside, says, come out. And I said, yeah, what? I can hear whistling, she said. Now, I knew what this was about, but I sort of treat it a bit lightheartedly. And I say, oh, yeah, what sort of whistling? Is it that kind of whistling? Or she says, no, Google's there. That means there's a sorcerer out there that's come to do us harm, So I said, you're a Christian. Yeah. Why don't you pray to the omnipotent, all-powerful creator of the universe to tell them to bugger off? If you do, they will.
Yeah.
And just say straight out. Oh, and if you don't believe that, stop calling yourself a Christian.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's spot on.
That doesn't get through, though, I don't think. I don't think that really, not with the old ones anyway. But what I say to my wife all the time, you're at least as powerful as these bastards. Don't think that they can hurt you. They can't. And we do believe, both of us believe, that the spirits of the old ones are around her and protect her. I believe that. I have no problem believing that. So we just sort of emphasise that sort of thing. But there was an Australian, what do you call them, ophthalmologist, who was working in, I think that's the word, working in Bali, operating for cataracts. And apparently it's really bad up there. There's a lot of it, and even amongst children. And he said his biggest problem was that they were Hindus and they believed that their kids are suffering because they must have done something really nasty in a former life, and this is so we accept that this is going to happen. Well, they didn't have any means of doing anything about it, so they invent a myth that comforts them. And everybody does that. If you don't have a scientific way of thinking, then you invent something that explains it all to you. And the doctor said, I found it really hard to try to convince them what the real causes were. Well, why bother? I would have said, yes, but your children have suffered enough now, and I'm here because God sent me. God sent me because I can stop them from suffering, because God doesn't want them to suffer anymore. They've paid their dues. I'd go along with their viewpoint. I wouldn't argue with them and say, no, you're wrong. I'd say, yeah, but why do you think I'm here? Why would God let me be here if he didn't think it was a good idea that your kids had suffered enough? So you can go along, instead of trying to oppose rationally, you accept what they're saying to you and find a way of arguing, yeah, but you're right, but this is why I'm here. This is why this is happening. This is why those white fellas, mostly Indians actually, down at the hospital can help you. You go along with the belief. Don't oppose directly.
Yeah, inculcate it too. And you saw that too, like, because I've seen a lot of missionaries come through the Cape, and ironically, the evangelicals do really well to get a crowd in. So, but they don't keep people. And the reason that was happening, I think, and this is just my subjective opinion after talking to a few of the people, both the pastors coming through, and I also know the Catholic priest who services the Cape, Father Rob Greenup, very well. And he says, look, Matt, we inculcate exactly what you said. We inculcate these views, and the Catholic mind allows, like, yes, are there spirits out there? Yes. Are they acting on you? Yes. Are there principalities? Yes. Are all these things? Yes. But like you said, they're subordinated in a hierarchy. The ultimate hierarchy is this. Whereas, so that tends to kind of like stick with people. So, but the evangelicals, but the evangelicals are just go, no, it's fantasy. It's just, those things simply don't exist. Well, not only is that really challenging, but it's not much of a step to go, well, then why do you think there's a, Christians do not believe in a bearded man in the sky. That would be Zeus. But like, why, it's not so much of a big step to then go, for people to kind of like go, well, then obviously there's no such thing as a great spirit who created you can't dismiss all of that and expect people to compartmentalize that part of thinking. But let's go into, I think you're spot on with that. I just want to get your, opinion on
being an ex-Catholic has helped me.
Oh, immensely.
Because you've got to have a mythological imagination. You've got to be able to believe that there is something out there apart from the world you can smell, hear, and touch and taste, and how profoundly people believe in it and how it guides their thinking. And I've been through that. So actually I scare away Mormons these days and the other religious groups that I'm not particularly interested when they come to my door, and I say to them, me and God, we're going to find we're mates. Oh, and by the way, she's black.
Yeah.
Talking about old men with beards in the sky. They run up my driveway. They run away from
me. Yeah. I've got to admit, like, I mean, my experiences were the other way, because I kind of like, I was raised Catholic, but kind of went away. It's like, oh, it's all stupid and foolish and, fairy tales. But ironically, it was being around Indigenous people, especially I've got to say the Torres Strait Islanders, more so then, that brought me back to this symbolic / medieval way of thinking. It's like, again, I started to, look, there are these principalities, these people. For me, that was like, these people, they act like it's real. So I have to walk in that. And then I'd kind of like, it started a really long process that ended up, living with me, living in atheist China and seeing it just doesn't work. Like there's no unifying principle. So anyway, that's a discussion.
I don't intellectually accept Christian beliefs at all, but I have huge respect for religiosity. And the people I've most enjoyed working with have been Christians,
Hmm.
because they do have this belief in something beyond who we are here on earth. And, it's just, well, I call it a mythological imagination, but to me, the word myth is a very, very powerful. And I actually heard somebody say something the other day on Netflix of all places, that myth is the truth without the facts. That's one way of putting it. But to me, Christianity is a myth, and it works for a hell of a lot of people, and good on you. You have to have a myth that works for you. And I'm not here to tell people that if they have a set of beliefs that works for them, I'm certainly not here to try to convince them they're wrong. I have my own way of dealing with the other world, if you like. That's all. I just have a different path.
I also found it really helped because when I came back to Cairns, came out of the Cape, I was in the cross-cultural, I was running the cross-cultural section for a little while, and I was the officer in charge when the Christchurch thing happened, which I hardly need to tell you put the wind right up for Muslims here. And I mean, they're all crapping themselves, and fair enough too, although, we were all over that. But one of the discussions I had, early on, and because I kind of said, words effective, how come you guys aren't getting on as well with the police? Is it just this incident? And I'm going to paraphrase what one of the imams told me. So it wasn't just wasn't just one of the kind of like, it was one of the imams. Well, mate, you're quite clearly Christian. Like, you haven't told us, but you are, aren't you? I said, yeah, absolutely, Catholic.
Yeah, right.
And they went, well, we know we can trust you. And again, I'm paraphrasing. I went, well, how so? So because you understand that you're going to be held accountable, that there is a higher power. That what happens here. That what happens here is, it's not that it's of no consequence, but there is and that you subordinated yourself to that. And I was like, yeah. Like, it was amazing that they did that.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
When I see somebody who's obviously Muslim, I put my hand over my heart and I say, Salaam alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
And one young woman in the hijab said to me, are you Muslim? And I said, no, I just think it's a beautiful way to greet somebody, that's all. Yeah. I mean, I understand why you say it, and it's a beautiful thing to do.
Of course it is. Peace be upon you.
So, as I said, I respect genuine religiosity. I'm not particularly worried about what religion. As long as you are genuinely believing that, then I respect you for it. Yeah.
Totally. Now let's get on to materialistic matters of politics. Yeah. So first, do you want to tell us your take on the Voice?
I think if the Voice got up, it would be a disaster. I worked for ATSIC for 4 years. It was a corrupt, totally mismanaged organisation that was bound to fall over. Before that, there were the attempts to set up advisory bodies. All of them failed, and I think this is just an attempt by the same people to set something up that can't be taken away from them because it's embedded in the Constitution. I have absolutely no problem whatsoever with constitutional recognition of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders. Fine. I have absolutely, in fact, I think it's a good idea. I have absolutely no problem with the legislated voice that can be changed or knocked on the head if necessary. But, Anthony Albanese is not reminding us that the finishing up of ATSIC was a totally bipartisan decision. It was not, they say, the Howard government did that. Yes, with the complete cooperation at the time of the ALP, because everybody could see it wasn't going to work. My wife was the inaugural chair of an Aboriginal, what was it called, Indigenous Advisory Council for the NT government when it was under Labor. It was actually Marion Scrimger, who's now the Labor member for Lingiari, who appointed her. That very same day, she resigned from the cabinet and from the party because she was battling with Alison Anderson, another Aboriginal woman, MLA, and who was also in the cabinet, and she couldn't bear working with her anymore, so she pulled out. This is the story we were told. She didn't tell us this, but this is what everybody was saying. Then Alison Anderson took over. My wife's counsel then reported to Alison Anderson, and she resigned. and pulled out and told everybody that Labor was racist, that the chief minister was dead man walking. She had a way with words, Sarah Ellison. Then she joined the CLP. Then she did the same to them. Then she became an independent, and now she works for Labor. She's paid by Labor to electioneer for them. Then Mullindiri McCarthy took over. By the way, we still think of her as Barb because we knew her when she was a kid in school. And I worked with the white father that never gets a mention. He was a good mate of mine, and he was a bloody good man. That experience convinced my wife that Labor does not listen. They pretend to listen. She said her council was made up of a really wide range of Aboriginal people from the territory. There were what we call townies of mixed race, English as a first language, bushies, full bloods. We still use the term. I know it outrages people, but just about every word I use outrages somebody these days. They were the full descent language speakers, first language and Aboriginal language, a really wide variety of views, and they were doing a good job, but Labor just ignored them. So that convinced Bess that to join the CLP and to try something different. So it was the CLP that knocked on the head, said, we don't need it, let's do away with it, because nobody was listening to it anyway. The idea of putting it in the Constitution, when you see the people pushing it, all of the people who are pushing it are people we know personally. We don't think it's a good idea. The worst aspect of it is that those same people have been running the agenda for the last 40 years. That they've had, hundreds of organisations speaking for Aboriginal people. They've now got 11 MPs down in Canberra who identify as Aboriginal, and yet they're saying nobody listens to us. We put over $30 billion a year into Aboriginal programs, but nobody's listening. Oh, for God's sake. And it's just an absolute absurdity. But you don't fool with the Constitution like that. Set up your organisation, legislate it, fine. And when you fall over, we can seriously change it or do away with it, which is what democracies do. They are overrepresented in the Northern Territory government, Aboriginal people as a whole, in the Northern Territory government, in the federal government, but we still don't have a voice. I mean, for God's sake, grow up. So I say if we had such a thing, it would be dominated by the same people. They're the people who speak English, who run all of the organisations, who have open access to the media and to politicians and have for decades, and call the shots. So everything that's gone wrong has gone wrong on their watch, and they want us to set up an organisation that we cannot change, and they want to be able to advise executive government. Oh God, it's just painful to think about. So what do I think of it? It'd be a disaster. And by the way, my wife's not here, and I hate speaking for her, but she's even more against it than I am.
So mate, putting aside your feelings, do you think it will get up? What's...
No, I don't. No, I don't. Because I think Australians are far too smart, and there's too many, it's just painfully obvious what's going on. References to the 67 referendum are totally irrelevant. When the 67, by the way, nobody in the Northern Territory was allowed to vote in the 67 referendum, white or black, none of us could. They've changed the law, so now we can, and will be counted in the national vote, but not for the state majority, right? So we'll be counted in relation to a majority of Australian people, but not in relation to a majority of states, because we're not states.
Yeah.
And I think the Northern Territory will definitely vote no. There's two aspects to it. One is that I think North Queensland's probably the same. If you're white and you're really concerned, if you're not Aboriginal and if you're really concerned about their problems, they're not going to fix it, because you can see what's happening on the ground all the time. If you're Aboriginal and you're conned by the activists who come up from down south and the what my wife calls the white blackfellas down south, who have particular points of view based on their own experience that up here we don't share, then a lot of people will vote no because they don't trust that mob down south. Even the ones who vote yes, we have the lowest voter turnout in the territory, and some remote communities have got down to 27% turnout of those enrolled.
Wow.
It's standard to be about between 40 and 50%. So even if in communities there are significant numbers who do support it, a lot of them aren't going to bother voting anyway. So that's up here. But I think right across Northern Australia, Western Australia, Queensland, parts of South Australia, those parts of the country that the pointy heads in Melbourne and Sydney automatically call racist just because we live here, I think it'll be an overwhelming no. And now we're down in Tasmania. we've got Michael Mansell saying, this is rubbish, don't do it. And then you got Rodney Dillon, oh, this is great. This is exactly what we know Rodney Dillon, and we know that there's an awful lot of bad blood between those two fellas. So even Tasmania is split down the middle. You get even the Aboriginal population is split down the middle. So I don't know. I just think overwhelmingly Australians just don't trust politicians, and especially when they just won't tell them what's really going on. So they can go on with all the corporates and all the sporting bodies and all that, but I think they don't follow you into the polling booth. Your boss, your CEO, doesn't follow you into the polling booth. And wherever we go, we have people coming up to us telling us how much they, as soon as they spot Bess, they don't necessarily recognise me, the funny old white fella who hangs around with my lovely wife, but they'll come up to Bess and say, Bess, we really admire you. We love what your daughter's doing. This is terrific. Keep it up. This happens to us everywhere, in the streets, airports, everywhere. We have a Queenslander come up the other day. They told us, look, I'm partly of Aboriginal descent, but I don't identify because it doesn't mean much in my life. And when we told her that who our daughter was, she hugged Bess and carried on about how wonderful she is. So that, you know, you're not going to hear that in the ABC or SBS, or certainly not in ITV.
Yeah.
But how many people watch the ABC anymore anyway? And we watch the news and spend half the time even watching the news trying to restrain ourselves and throwing a shoe through the screen, you know. But
the sort of people, the people who watch the ABC, SBS, and ITV and have their opinions shaped by those organisations are the sort of people who watch the ABC, the SBS, and ITV and have their opinions shaped.
Well, no, yes, anyway. So
yeah,
you know, who cares? But the rest of us, I am a bit concerned that what I am concerned about the extreme left agenda, and this is in relation to sexual orientation, feminism, the whole lot, is when they push it so far, we will get a backlash. It's done already. And there will be racists who try to take advantage of what our daughter and what Bess has said publicly to push their own agenda. But this is what happens. But the extreme left is so dangerous now that you just have to accept that risk and tell the truth. I mean, if the racist troglodytes are going to jump up and down and say, well, isn't Bess wonderful, isn't Jacinta Price wonderful, and then push their own agenda, we knock them down, like we always have done. But the other side never give them a voice anyway. Don't listen to them, and pretend they don't exist. So,
it's so you said truth telling. So let's make that our next little because you know there's a big push in Queensland, and part of the thing is there's going to be like a tribunal set up to fundamentally tell the truth, which means basically give a government approved version of Australia's history and what we all must, I suppose, at risk of God knows what, at least being called a bad person, a denier of some sort. I'd be interested in your take on the idea of how helpful it might be to set up a truth-telling commission.
Depends who's setting it up. If it was Nelson Mandela, I'd trust it. We don't have one of them. How can you trust a political leader with a totally honest, good Polish name, Palashchuk, and who turns it into Palaszczuk? I mean, I don't trust her. When I first heard the pronunciation, the way she was pronouncing her own name, I thought, I can't trust this woman. So Yeah, the left isn't interested in the truth. The left is interested in imposing an ideology. Now, the other side does that too, but the truth is really complex. And Queensland's a good example. I've read several books on the frontier violence in Queensland.
Yeah.
And the Native police killed an awful lot of people and raped an awful lot of people.
Yep.
So the crankiest and most anti-white and the one who bangs on about racism the most could easily be a descendant of a Native policeman who killed and raped his way across Queensland. I mean, it's complex. My father-in-law, Bess's dad, he, at the age of 14, we think, around that time, he had to run like hell to the west to avoid the Coniston massacre, when somewhere between 70 to 100 men, women and children were shot in response to the death of one white man.
Yeah.
He had to flee in a big hurry, and he said people were coming through saying they're shooting everybody. And the police party followed them on their tracks for a few kilometres and stopped and turned around. And so he was there then, he was alive then. By the way, the worst killer, now this is where truth comes in, the worst killer was an Aranda police tracker who had to be told by the white policeman in charge to stop killing children. And the local historian said those who knew him assumed that he would have done it anyway whenever the copper wasn't looking. Aboriginal witnesses said that he raped women before shooting them. So let's tell the whole truth. He lived until the 60s. I know where he lived, in town here in a town camp. He escaped. He got away scot-free from all that. And there are other Aboriginal men who, well, there's one really well-known Aboriginal man who rode with the police party. He didn't kill anybody. He looked after the horses and was kept out of it. But he ended up fathering 28 kids with 3 Wallaby wives and was a highly respected member of the community. So this is complicated stuff, really. And if they tell the whole truth, I'm all for it. Now, in 1942, my father-in-law, by then in his late 20s, was arrested by an Aboriginal tracker and a bloke he thought was a copper. I think now he probably wasn't a copper, but he thought he was being arrested for spearing some goats and eating them off one of the stations that he had been working at prior to that, 10 years before that. He and his brothers-in-law were chained and walked barefoot and naked behind a camel. They went from waterhole to waterhole and picked up a whole lot of other people on the way. And they were being fed by pastoralists along the way. And then they got to the highway, what's now the highway, went up to Aileron, put on trucks and driven to Alice Springs to eventually be conned into working for the army for 5 shillings a week. It was an army recruitment drive. Oh. They were walked at least 300 kilometres, right? Now, that's pretty crook, eh? Not a way to treat a bloke. But, and by the way, I can't find any records relating to it. But oral history, yes, white and black. And including my father-in-law's own statement. And I happen to believe my old father-in-law. But he was enormously proud of the work he did with the army. You see? Again. So having been recruited that way, his attitude was basically, he talks about the old men that were with him. One old man said, I want to go home, this is awful. And basically his attitude, well, shit happens. Let's get on with it. Let's see what we can make out of this. That was his. And he not only did not hate white fellas, he was enormously proud that one of them married his daughter, me, embarrassingly proud. Now, he just knew how to accommodate people, and he also knew there were people out to kill him, Aboriginal people, because he fooled around with their wives. He admitted that, and he said, yeah, these blokes want to kill me, but don't worry, I threw spears at them and boomerangs and I fought them off. And he was totally, what's the word? He was frank about what was going on. So, okay, white fellas come along and give him a hard time too. Well, black fellas did that to him before anyway. And he, at several points, we've got these audio recordings, and at several points in those recordings, he said these were murderers, these were bad people, but now they're gone and now the good people are here. That was his attitude. You know, now we've got good white fellas and they're good. They look after us. They're fine. So everything's forgiven. That sort of truth telling, if we can tell those stories, yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, and I can't see it happening. I have absolutely no trust of academia. Zilch. Zero.
Oh, no,
None.
I did hear it was an Aboriginal woman on Radio National the other day, I think it was Radio National, talking about these awful things that happened to her father, but she said her father had the same sort of attitude. This was, you know, about stolen generation, all that sort of stuff. There's a woman close to us who's married to a Korea woman, married to our nephew, white nephew, and she was stolen generation. She was down there to hear Rudd's apology. And she says straight out, she knows why she was taken away. She said, my father went off into the bush and drank himself to death because his kids were taken away, but my parents were alcoholics and they couldn't look after us. So there are people like out there saying these things. You just got to find them and give them a voice. That sort of voice I'm very keen on. Tell the whole story. You know, the stolen generation people up here who will look you right in the eye, there's not many of them left anymore, and say it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
I was, you know, I've been working all my life, I was educated, but they're people up here who knew their families and were united with their families. Their experience was less bitter, I suppose, than other people's. But all I'm saying is just everybody's got the right to tell their story. But the mob who run the agenda actively go right out of their way to suppress any voice that tells a story different from the narrative that they're pushing. That's the problem.
That's why I distrust. It's not truth telling. It's agenda. It's agenda based. It's narrative. It's creating a narrative because through the agenda. That's all this is about. I do not trust any of those people involved. Not even a little bit.
Yes, that's right.
And having worked in, like, I can't say too much because I still work in the state government, but like having met some of the people, I was just like,
yeah,
wow. It's like, and when you're speaking to some of the non-Indigenous ones who, you know, I heard, again, I'm kind of paraphrasing, it's like, well, kind of like truth. It's sounding like, you know, what is this truth thing anyway? Like, you know, again, the Derrida's idea that there's no such thing as truth, really. There's only narrative in the service of power. That's it. So, I mean, if you truly believe that, do you really want people like that who don't think that there's such thing as a truth? Head of a truth-telling commission? It's like, dude, I'd rather punch his pilot.
Yeah. Yes. They're out to attack our nation. They attack the myths that our nation is built on, and they are myths because every nation is built on myths. They use terms like the imagined nation. Every nation, every political structure, every culture is imagined. Where else does it come from? It's in people's heads. So the Aboriginal culture was imagined. It didn't exist out of Aboriginal brains, and we have a myth that sustains us as a nation. Now, there's knobs on it because all of them have knobs on it. I mean, there's no nation on earth, there's no political structure anywhere on earth that tells the whole objective truth.
No.
But you do away with that, you have chaos. Now, you can adapt it as time goes on, and in Australia, we've done that. We've gone from being, you know, 3 cheers for the Poms. Thank God for the British Empire. You know, okay, now we can see, well, there were actually problems with that too. But it's like Churchill with his, you know, democracy is the best form of government, except the worst form of government, except for all the others. Ours is the worst nation on earth, except for all the others. So, if you've got to accept a degree of, simply mythologizing. That's what it is, but that's what we do, and that's how we create nations. That's how we create institutions. That's how we create cultures. And they seriously want to do very, very serious damage to ours. Their path leads to chaos and authoritarianism and the loss of democracy. Do we really want that? Nah, I don't think so.
No, God forbid. All right. Other issues, black deaths in custody.
Yeah. The one thing that gets left out of the report of the Royal Commission is that the Commissioner said something like, one thing is certain, that only Aboriginal people can, in the end, what were the words? Ensure their own future. In other words, governments can do all they like, but until Aboriginal people themselves decided we need to change, the world needs to change, only they can do it. That never gets quoted. I quote it all the time, although I can't remember the exact words. What the Royal Commission found was that not one of the individuals who died in custody throughout that period, through the period of the research, died as a result of direct action of police officers or prison officers. But there were plenty of cases of neglect and etc. The system could work a lot better. Since then, they could talk about these 400 people dying in prison. The great majority, the criminals, they also have this myth that Aboriginal people are locked up for no good reason. Oh, yeah, sure. A granddaughter to us was stabbed to death by her estranged husband. He got manslaughter instead of murder because the senior prosecutor at the time told us that no jury in Alice Springs would convict an Aboriginal killer if their victim was Aboriginal if they only stabbed once. So the message to an Aboriginal person, if you want to kill somebody with a knife, only stab them once and you're guaranteed manslaughter instead of murder. The fact is that Aboriginal people generally get far more lenient sentences than white fellas, that they are less likely to be charged with a serious offence than a white fella in the first place. And this goes back a long way. I mean, even I've seen quotes from 1911 from Baldwin Spencer, who was the protector of Aboriginals in the top end. And he basically said, if a boy kills another boy, well, it's not really our business. Or if a gin gets killed by a husband, well, they'll sort it out. We won't bother laying charges. That sort of mentality stayed right through in the Northern Territory out in very recent times, probably the 1970s. So to begin with, black on black crime was just ignored right through all of that period. I think, what's his name? Edward Eyre. He tried to convince the government to allow Aboriginal witnesses the right to give testimony in trial. They hadn't been given the right to give testimony in trial prior to that because they were not Christian, therefore they couldn't take an oath on the Bible. And the reason he did that was because by other Aboriginal become the Aboriginal witnesses, so they couldn't give testimony in court. See what I mean about the complexity of truth telling?
Yeah.
So
hang on, mate.
What has happened?
We just had a big bit of interference there. I lost you at Edward John Eyre. So if you could kind of like run on with there and how he wanted to change things. Sorry about that. I'll just cut that bit out.
At the time, testimony wasn't taken from Aboriginal people because they weren't Christians and therefore couldn't take the oath on the Bible. He argued really strongly that Aboriginal witnesses should be able to give testimony because an Aboriginal woman was brutally raped by a group of Aboriginal men on one of his properties, and it didn't go to trial because the only witnesses were Aboriginal. So he wanted Aboriginal witnesses to be able to give testimony, not just so that white criminals could be convicted, because obviously there were cases of white men murdering and raping Aboriginal people, getting away with it because the only witnesses were Aboriginal, but also to protect Aboriginal people from Aboriginal crime. And to us, we see this all the time. We've seen so many people get away with very serious crimes of violence against our loved ones, family members, because they're Aboriginal and because either the prosecutors are as weak as buggery or the defence lawyers are really smarmy and clever. Like a bloke tried to stab my wife's sister. He got away with carrying a lethal weapon. He blamed my sister. My sister was actually cut by the knife. My sister-in-law cut by the knife, but he reckoned that was his nephew who did that. His nephew just conveniently happened to be dead at the time. So we know what's going on. One of Bess's cousins disappeared in her early teens, in her mid-teens. I knew her. She was just a beautiful young girl. All of the senior women in Bess's family have told us she was murdered. She was executed because she refused to go to a promised husband who had already killed one wife, right? Police never investigated it. That happened 40 years ago, just forgotten about. So we know of plenty of cases of violence against Aboriginal people by other Aboriginal people where they've either got off scot-free or there hasn't even been an investigation. So when they turn around and say, well, there's 400 blokes who died in custody, and yet none of them, it cannot be demonstrated that any of them died as a result of the criminality on the part of police or prisoners officers, we're not very impressed. One bloke known really well to us, he'd been convicted himself of involvement in a gang rape that put the victim into Aboriginal, of course, Aboriginal victim into ICU for a while. He was regularly violent to his wife, who was related to my wife, so we knew all about it. He kept drinking. He was told by his doctors, you have to stop drinking or you'll die. So what did he do? He went up to Darwin and kept drinking. Coppers pick him up because he's as drunk as a skunk, put him in the drunk tank, and he dies. Totally predictable. Then it becomes a death in custody. He's one of the ones that those lunatics like Lydia Thorpe carry on about genocide, because he died in custody, therefore it's a case of genocide against, just the illogicality of it is sickening. Meanwhile, many more Aboriginal women are dying in the custody of Aboriginal men. Nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
So it's just, sure, nobody should be killed because of their race. And that did happen. As far as I can make out, it doesn't happen now. Too many of the ones who die in custody are actually serious criminals who don't deserve our compassion all that much. They shouldn't die of neglect and a systemic failure. No, they shouldn't. That's right. But all those other people outside of custody who are dying, nobody cares about. So what I've always said about Black Lives Matter, the only Black Lives Matter are the lives of black men who are taken by white policemen. The thousands more. I mean, in America, I've read that Ku Klux Klan murdered 3,500 blacks over an 80-year period or something. That many now die as a result of the homicidal activity of other black people, are killed by other blacks every 6 months.
Yeah.
So where should the emphasis be? That's all. I mean, yeah, eliminate racism, eliminate unjustifiable deaths, absolutely. But for God's sake, let's get the balance right. Let's talk about what else is going on.
Yeah. Coleman Hughes, and he talks about this all the time, that magnificent American intellectual. Of course, Thomas Sowell, although his writing's slowed down now, because, another absolutely brilliant man who says precisely the same thing. It's like, can we tell the truth about this? But look, can we, I know you speak a little bit of Walpuri. Can we have a really brief discussion about how language shapes conceptual framework and therefore values and actions and stuff like that? Because there's some concepts that I know that don't exist in Walpuri and exist in English. Like a really simple one is like, I don't speak Wick, but when I was up in Arakoon, I developed a vocab of about 20 or so words. But there is no word for thank you in Wick.
Please.
Yeah.
In any Aboriginal language.
Yeah, and it's because it's like you do something, it's like you, and when I first heard that, it astounded me, because I was like, what, you don't thank people? It's like, no, you have to do these things. Like, it's an obligation. It's like, why would you thank someone for do you thank a mother for its umbilical cord to the baby? It's like, no, it's crazy. Like,
You give because you're obliged. You receive because you have the right. Yeah, but people still show gratitude. This is what I keep saying to people. They just have a different way of showing gratitude. So often you'll get people say to me, oh, Jangala, you're a good man. You grew me up when I spent 6 months teaching or something, or you helped me that time. I remember when you helped me. You gave me money when I needed. People still say things like that, but they just don't say please or thank you because it's considered totally unnecessary. But that's the same with all hunter-gatherer peoples everywhere. It's not just them. It's small kin-based hunter-gatherer type societies where they don't do it. They just show it. But another one, well, the example I just love to give, I said to my wife after we'd been married for a while, I'd like to be able to say I love you to you in your language. Can you teach me? And she rolled her eyes as if to say, oh, you white fellas are strange, And she says, you can say that, but we don't. I said, what do you mean you don't? We don't say I love you to each other all the time like you wussy white fellas. So I said, okay, husbands and wives don't say I love you to each other. No. All right. What about boyfriends and girlfriends? Oh, yeah, they do. Okay, now I can see what's going on.
I think I see where this is going. Yeah, okay.
But the other thing, the word Wanninja is translated as love, but it's sexual love. You'd never use it for any other relative or kin than the one you're in a sexual relationship with, right? But Wanninja means throat or neck, right? So different cultures associate different emotions with different parts of the body. So like for, and kin relations too with different parts of the body. But Wanninja Kanagonyina can translate as I love you, I am your lover, or I am being throat for you. There were just so many concepts that just isn't a word for, or there is a word, but you have to explain how it's used in that particular culture. Like we used to teach Warrabri, and we'd ask students to, okay, write down something in English about yourself that you'd like to be able to say in Warrabri. Mostly we just couldn't translate it. Like, oh, I love to go dancing on a Saturday night. Okay, there's a word for dancing, but it's nothing to do with getting down with your boyfriend or girlfriend on Saturday night. It's about men and women dancing separately and ceremony, and it's a totally different thing. Please and thank you are the obvious ones, but but now Aboriginal people generally understand this too, so they might say please half a dozen times or thank you half a dozen times because they know we get really funny if you don't say it.
Yeah.
So I teach, when kids, when I ask for something, I say, we white fellas say please. Oh, please. Or, give them something, you should say please, thank you to white fellas because we get a bit funny. Oh, thank you. So you can teach it, but I don't insist on it either. I mean, there's plenty of people I will give things to and I don't expect a thank you. I remember I walked into a sandwich shop once and there was an Aboriginal mother buying a sandwich and she put some money on the counter and the woman behind the counter says, that's not enough, love. You need another 50 cents. So I take 50 cents out of my pocket, I put it on the counter, slide it over to her, and she pushes it across to the white woman. The white woman says, say thank you. That kind man just gave you money. I said to the white woman, she doesn't have to thank me. She's my sister. Now, of course, that just made the white woman look really confused, didn't know what was, probably thought, oh, another loony. But the Aboriginal woman knew exactly what I meant by that. So what I say to people is just accept people what they are. I've had people saying, Dave, what do Aboriginal people think about this or that? And I said, why are you asking me? I'm not Aboriginal. Go ask them. I said, what to begin with, Aboriginal people, same as any other group, they've all got different opinions about things. Yeah. But the only thing I can guarantee is whatever they think will be different from the way you think about it. I can pretty well guarantee.
I don't know what they think, but it won't be the same as you.
It won't be the same as you. That's exactly. And that, that's the same with any language to some degree. Portuguese have a saying that when you learn another language, you gain another soul.
Exactly.
Which is pretty dramatic and thing to say, but there's an awful lot of truth in it. You gain a totally different way of looking at the world. And that is, but it's just because Aboriginal languages are probably the most different languages on earth from English. So the differences are really, really big.
Well, the reason I raise this is because I know you've got a book coming. Can you briefly discuss your book? Tell us about that.
My book, it's been a long time in the making. I've got several excuses for that. One is our lives are very busy and crises keep overwhelming us, but also the problem with writing about Aboriginal people is they didn't leave anything in writing behind. So you have to rely, sometimes I'll read a book to find 2 or 3 sentences that are absolute gems, but I had to read the whole damn book to get to those. And I rely on my wife tremendously to get her views on everything I write about her people. I can say this is what I think is going on, but Bess may have a completely different view. But I am getting towards the end. What I've tried to do, I'm calling it Jabaldari's journey. Jabaldari is Bess's father, and he left behind these recordings. So I'm trying to, even figuring out what year he was born has been a struggle. Where he was born has been a struggle. There were different views from different people. So a lot of what I write is, this is what we believe on this evidence was going on at the time. And the other thing is, you cannot, with this relates to this truth-telling thing, you cannot really understand what happened to him without understanding what was going on in the rest of Australia and indeed the rest of the world even. So I've had this, it's turned into an Aboriginal history of Central Australia within the context of world history. That's what I'm actually trying to do. So, it's a big ask. But I reckon I'm about 2 chapters off finishing it.
Well, we look forward to it. We look forward to it. So, speaking of, you've been talking about Bess, whose only real fault seems to be something that she shares with my wife, being phenomenally bad taste in men. How did yeah, take it on the chin, Price. You know you're good for it.
We like putting ourselves down, don't we? Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, you know you're good for it. So, mate, how did you and Bess meet and get together? And
we worked at the same school. So did my first wife and her first husband. My wife's in the kitchen now within earshot, so I've got to be careful.
Yeah, be very careful. Tell her I said g'day. Tell her it's me and I said g'day.
Yeah, it's Matt Maloney says g'day. She said hi, Matt, but quietly. Yeah, and our marriage was broken up. Bess had been trying to get away from the homicidal maniac she'd been living with, and my wife hadn't done the right thing by me. So everybody in the community knew what was going on. They knew our stories. They understood. Turns out my family wasn't real keen on my first wife, but didn't tell me that till I told them it was split up. Bess's family were, I don't know about overjoyed, but quite happy that I was going to be taking her out of a very difficult situation, because they were in conflict regularly with his family. So we had the full support of both our families. So basically, took me a long time to screw up the courage to actually suggest to my first wife that we should split. By the time it happened, she was all for it too. And so I said to Bess's family one day, I also worked, her aunts and her sisters were also working in the same school. And I said to them, look, I'm going to leave and you know why? They said, yeah, we know. And I'd like to take Bess with me, but only if, with your approval. I won't take her unless the family says yes. They said, leave it to us. They went away and talked to the men on my behalf. I didn't speak to any men about this. They came back and said, Bess's mum says yes. She knew all about it anyway. I mean, mothers always know what's going on. You can't hide things from them. And they said brothers all say yes. And even a promised husband who was already, Bess had been expected to go to a promised husband when she was 13 as his second wife. Her elder sister was his first wife, so she would have been going to her sister's household. He was, I think, in his early 40s. He had given up on Bess because when he suggested, actually it was her sister who said, now it's time you came over and would co-wife with me. Bess didn't want to do that. She wanted to finish her education and see a bit of the world. So she kicked and screamed and said, no, I'm not going to do that. And they gave up and said, oh, this is just too hard. Her father supported her. which is very uncharacteristic of Warrabee men to support their daughters like that. And both the promised husband and father both basically said, well, you know, okay, we'll let you off this time, wait till you finish school and we'll talk about it then, which is a big, really big thing for them to say, to agree to. And I think the first husband probably thought, oh God, this girl's, you know, she's good looking, but she's too much of a rebel, I think. And then they said, you know, so promised husband says yes. And I thought, oh, that's a win. Great. He and I really got on well together, by the way, when all this was happening. We never discussed this issue. And then I naively said, what about a dad? You know, what does he think? And one of his aunts said to me, don't worry about him. We'll tell him later. We're his sisters. We give you his permission. So that's the other side of the misogynist patriarchy, you know. The women, your father's sister can act as in his stead with his authority on occasions. And so Bess and I took a big risk. She was 18, I was 28. She told me she was 19 because she thought I'd think 18 was too young. She had she was a mother at 13, so she had a 5-year-old with her, 5-year-old son. And we took off together. First thing I did was take her down to meet my family, who treated her like the original little black princess who couldn't do anything wrong. It was a bit embarrassing, actually. They already overdid it, I thought, but they all fell in love with her immediately. My wife's family thought I was a hero because I didn't hit her, which was a big plus because just about everybody else did. And I fussed over her. I remember we're on a trip in Queensland, we were actually, with her mum, and Bess got really sick, just with a virus. So I stopped, got a motel room and looked after her as best I could. And her mum was absolutely delighted that I fussed over so much because Warrabee husbands don't do that to their wives. So if your wife's sick, her female relatives look after her. You don't have to, they do. I mean, you can be concerned and stuff, but you don't actively take part in caring for her, you know. So her family thought I was a hero. My family thought Bess was the best thing that ever happened to them. And so here we are 44 years later. We took a huge risk. We didn't know each other at all, really. But I do tell people that she was the most beautiful female I'd ever laid eyes on up till that stage of my life. Still is the case. And I was enormously attracted to her. And then one day I said to her, and she was far more emotionally strong than I was. Emotional strength was amazing. And I needed that in my life. And then I said to her one day, why did you come with me? And she said, because you're white. But she insisted that was a joke. Yeah. She said, I just wanted to know what you white fellas are like. So I thought, marrying one means I'd get to know what you're really like. Yeah. But then she said, nah, I thought you were good looking and handsome and all that too. Oh, thank God for that. Not just bloody being white.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Her throat ached for you, it turns out.
That's right. And when we first got together, she acted like a dutiful Warrabee wife and reacted to every one of my, well, if I asked her to do something, it turned into a command that she couldn't possibly refuse because I was her husband. That lasted about 5 minutes. Now I refer to her as Senora la Jefa in Spanish, which means lady boss. Mm. So I've always wanted her, you know, I didn't want a slave, I wanted a partner. And that's why we've done things. Bess, I've always said to her family, if she couldn't handle living with me, I wouldn't hold her back. She could go back any time. She spent lots of time in the early days. She'd go back and stay with her family on the community. And I'd get on with what I was doing. And then we both went through the loss of our son to leukemia when he was only 10 years old. That usually often splits families up, but for us, it brought us closer together, I think. I'm sure of that. And on most things we agree on with each other, and those things that we don't agree, we have no problem working out how to agree to disagree and compromise and get on with it. So I'm rather proud of the fact that we're still together.
Yes. Well, again, and it's a testimony to her phenomenally bad taste in men. So, speaking of, incredibly proud women, Jacinta, got to be proud of that absolute butt-kicking future Prime Minister.
Enormously proud of her. I am a little bit worried about people carrying on about that future Prime Minister thing, just as I know how hard that is. I mean, her mum was in politics, and that was a hard road to hoe. That was bloody difficult. So we don't regret doing it. Bess certainly doesn't. I don't regret supporting her, but it was really hard. And so we worry for our daughter. I have said to people, look, just settle down, give her time to learn the job. But she has surprised me. She's done much better so far than I hoped she would. I always hoped she would, but she's a daughter. You worry about your kids, don't you? So you put themselves in a situation where life's really stressful and difficult. You worry for them. But we're both enormously proud. I mean, when it was announced that, like when Bess became a minister, it was in her first term in Parliament, and I really did not want that to happen. And she knocked back the request to take on a portfolio 3 times before she had to give in, because literally in that government there was nobody else really they could call on. And so I saw the stresses that caused her, and I mean, she did the best she could, but it was pretty hard for her. And so when they made Jacinta Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs, once again, I was pretty worried, but she seems to be doing a damn fine job. So the other thing is we're very proud of the fact we don't take credit for her work, but we agree with every word we've heard come out of her mouth so far. And we like to think we had something with putting those ideas in her head in the first place. But
well, she's rather fighty. She's a rather fighty lady, and I've got a pretty good idea where that might have come from. That really,
Well, the other thing was at the age of 4, she was with us when she saw her brother die, and at the time, no, it didn't worry me at the time. I insisted she had to be with us for that experience. I think that's given her an immense amount of courage. She's seen terrible things happen to her close relatives. That's made her just more determined and more gutsy rather than more vulnerable, I think. And she's got the Wallaby and the Irish in her, so she's not going to back down from a fight.
Yeah. Good luck with that. But speaking of while we do shout outs, the last thing, and I'm actually late for another meeting, but I've enjoyed this conversation so much, so I've kept going. Mate, Dr. Anthony Dillon, we're both quite well acquainted with him. So
Anthony Dillon.
Let's give him some love. Mate.
Well, he's brought us together, hasn't he? And an awful lot of other people together. And he writes stuff that's enormously balanced and erudite and dignified. That's a word I like to use. The only complaint I'd make is he's too damn nice to people. But that's him.
Yeah.
And we need the nice people as well as the belligerent bullfads like me. So I think he's wonderful. But good parents, too.
Yeah.
Great fun.
Yeah, he's a hero to the Queen. Yeah.
I mean, I love the way he calls himself part Aboriginal because his mother's white, for God's sake. What's he supposed to do? Deny she exists?
Yeah.
Like so many others do. All of the mob pushing for the voice, they're all either got white parents, certainly white heritage somewhere back there. Some of them have got white parents. And all of them, I'd say, are married or have been married to white people. And yet it's all black, Indigenous, blah, blah, blah. They never say, hang on, well, actually, I got a lot of support from my white wife. Never hear him say anything like that. It's just disingenuous, I think. But Anthony does. I really admire him for that. Good on you, mate. Stand up for your old mum.
Yeah. And that's it too. But I mean, his dad was a hero in the police, as you well know.
Yeah, I know.
So, you know, courage runs, that thread of courage quite clearly. His son's got it.
You don't, when you know you're right, you don't back down. Yeah.
That's it. Well, mate, look, I'll just get any last comments from you, and after that, we'll have to wrap it up. We've had a fantastic conversation, but yeah, mate, any insights?
What can I say? I think I know that Aboriginal people generally have the intelligence and the guts to make things better for themselves. I think they just need the chance to do that. And instead of, they just have to be allowed to get away from this idea that they can't do anything for themselves unless the government does it for them. I was a public servant 15.5 years, mate. I cannot figure out why anybody believes that a government can solve their problems for them. Governments don't do that. People do that, and they can do it with the support of the government, but the government's never going to do it for you. So I think they can work that out. I know enough courageous, intelligent Aboriginal people who know that themselves. I've always known people like that. You just don't hear from them very much. And I think the time's coming when you will hear more from them. And I think when this idiot notion that if the voice doesn't get up, it'll cause so much heartache and pain to Aboriginal people. Like, every blackfellas in Australia is going to curl up in the fetal position and cry themselves to sleep at night. I mean, that's just idiotic. They treat Aboriginal people like perpetual infantile victims. But I know they're not like that. I know a hell of a lot of people who are not like that. Even the people who have given up, they've still got brains in their head. They still know what they're doing to themselves. And if you talk to them the right way and you challenge what they're doing, they thank you for it. So let's just get away from this idiot notion that they're victims with a capital V. And in fact, they're complex human beings just like the bloody rest of us. The rest of us have got problems too. Yeah. I remember going down to a meeting once when Bob Hawke was Prime Minister, and I was representing the Commonwealth to talk to a whole lot of Aboriginal people about petrol sniffing. And I was supposed to give them some sort of support advice. My boss, Bob Hawke, at the same time was crying on television because his daughter was a heroin addict. He couldn't do anything about it. You think we haven't got problems? Why are you asking us?
Yeah, exactly.